as well. We have that one, and then the week after is our final event for this series for the spring. We do not have community conversations events during the summer, but we will be back in the fall. So please check out our website for schedule updates as they come down. And that is lowercolumbia.edu/conversations. And you can also find an archive of our previous events there, so you can watch recordings of this quarter's events as well as ones from the previous quarters we have going back several years now. So please take advantage of that. But today, I want to welcome Allison McCrady. Allison McCrady has been teaching at LCC since 2005. She completed her master's in International Community Development at Northwest University in 2017, having spent 2 years researching immigration and integration issues at both the global and the local community levels. She loves to travel and is always happy to meet new friends who can teach her about different places around the world and different perspectives. Please welcome Allison McCrady.
And thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back in person, for me, mask-free, and thank you again so much for all the hard work that Courtney does behind the scenes to make this possible every quarter. So the theme of this quarter's lectures is the sense of place, and I'm always looking for ways to tie the theme into what I'm passionate about, which is talking about global issues and especially connecting to immigration and how our community can better welcome and connect and empower newcomers to our communities. So my title this morning is In Search of a Safe Place. We all want to live in a community where we feel safe, where we can work and play, study, raise our kids in a peaceful and safe environment. Unfortunately, for many people around the world, this isn't possible. They're not experiencing this, and they're being involuntarily displaced from their homes and in some cases from their countries. So this morning I'd just like to spend a little bit of time sharing with you some information about involuntary displacement on a global scale, and hopefully we can all be better informed to welcome individuals and families that we might encounter that are coming from that experience into our community. So for most of us, moving is a choice. The first 10 years of my married life, we moved 8 times. The last time we moved was 3 years ago, and I never want to do it again, but I'm sure I'll have to. We moved because maybe we want to downsize, get a smaller house, maybe we want to upsize, we have a bigger growing family. Maybe we want to get away from traffic and get into a community where even the squirrels have safe transportation options. We might move because we're looking for more job opportunities, excuse me, or because of family. Maybe we want to move closer to our family, maybe we want to move farther away from our family. Those of you that heard my lecture in the fall would probably like to see the outcome of the saga of the purple suit, or the eggplant suit. This was the final product of our family photo. But most of us, we move because we think, let's see, where did I go? We think the grass is greener on the other side, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't always turn out the way we expect. But in general, most of us have moved or will move out of choice. For much of the world, moving is not optional. It really is a matter of life or death. According to the 2020 World Migration Report that was published by the International Organization for migration, an estimated 281 million people, or 3.5% of the world's population, live in countries other than their country of birth. Now, a vast majority of these people have moved for economic reasons. They've moved in order to find sustainable livelihoods to support themselves and their families. So you could still consider them somewhat voluntary. But this morning I really want to focus on global displacement that's caused by sudden and severe crises, which are at a record high. The number of internally displaced people, which are people that have been forced from their homes but are still within their home country, is at 41 million. And the number of refugees who have crossed international borders is 26 million people. That is a tremendous number of people who are involuntarily forced out of their homes. So one kind of area of interest for me is who exactly is keeping track of all these people, right? And how do we know who they are and where they're from and where they're going? So there are a number of international organizations and agencies that keep track and, more importantly, attempt to take care of all of these people that are on the move. Under the 1951 Refugee Convention that was initiated by the United Nations member countries, there are key principles under international law that regulate how people are cared for when they're in these situations of involuntary displacement. The one that you're going to see the most often, like on news reports, you might see it on posters or on people's vests or shirts, is the UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is quite a mouthful. So I've noticed that recently they have started rebranding a lot of what they're putting out as the United Nations Agency for Refugees. It's a little less cumbersome. But the UNHCR serves as the guardian of this international law that protects refugees. And member states, member countries in the United Nations are expected to follow along with what the UNHCR is recommending. There's also the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which helps kind of fill some gaps, which we'll talk about a little later in terms of people that are not legally refugees but still need to be cared for. The International Organization for Migration is very important in tracking numbers. There's the Migration Policy Institute. There's the International Rescue Committee. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, which is a collaboration between the Red Cross Christian Agency and the Red Crescent, which is its counterpart from the Muslim community. So these are all international agencies that are helping us care for our refugees and other displaced people. There's also just tons of other organizations. A lot of great work is being done out there globally. So it might be helpful to talk about just some definitions. Like we throw these words around: refugee, migrant, involuntarily displaced, internally displaced. What do all these mean? So I just want to give you a few definitions. An internally displaced person is legally defined as a person or groups of persons who have been forced to flee or leave their homes, in particular as a result of or in order to avoid or human-made disasters, and who have not crossed international borders. So this is kind of a all-encompassing term to describe people who are in crisis but haven't left their home country. We also have refugees, which legally means individuals who can prove they fled their origin country due to a well-founded fear of persecution because of their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social or ethnic group, or political opinion. Okay. And then we have, asylum seekers. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because everyone approaching an international border looking for safety is seeking asylum. They're seeking sanctuary, they're seeking safety. When they get to the border, they're acknowledged as a refugee, which is the legal label. And then at that point, they apply for asylum within their host, whatever their host country is going to be. So it's almost, they start out as asylum seekers, they become a refugee, then they are an asylum seeker again, or an asylee is the other term. So an asylum seeker is someone looking for safety but who has not been processed. Their request has not been officially approved by the host country. So this is a template for an official refugee identification card. So once someone is in a refugee situation and crosses the border, the aid workers, the United Nations workers are able to issue them a legal identification that then acknowledges them as having refugee status. And the most important implication of this is that now they are protected under international law and cannot be forced to return to their home country. So again, once that's moving along, then they get to apply for asylum. And this is where coming to the United States gets to be really interesting. The United States offers an online application that's 12 pages long. It starts out in English. Now, thanks to technology, you can translate it, translate the page. But it's it's kind of like filing your taxes online, right? It's a government form, and it includes a background check and some pretty detailed questions about why you're seeking asylum. And one of the challenges with this is that for many people in this situation, they have come out of an extremely traumatic experience, right? So being asked to fill out this form and detail what they've been through forces them to essentially relive their trauma, and with this heightened expectation that if you don't answer this correctly, you're not going to be granted asylum. So it's a very long process, and it can be a very difficult and traumatic experience for a lot of people. They have to detail exactly what harm, mistreatment, or threats they have experienced or are afraid they may experience in their home country. So, meanwhile, internally displaced persons are kind of in a legal gray area, at least right now. The international human rights and aid community is always working to try to figure out exactly what kinds of protections people have who are still within their home country but are forced out of their homes. So they don't necessarily have special legal status internationally, but they're definitely being cared for to the best of the ability of the aid community. So the United States also offers what's called temporary protected status. If you are from one of the countries that has this status and it changes daily, so there are cases where individuals have left their home country as being under temporary protected status, but by the time they arrive in the United States, their country's been taken off the list. So then they go back into a whole different, process. But TPS, as it's usually referred to, is designated by the Secretary of Homeland Security due to temporary conditions in a country such as armed conflict, civil war, an environmental disaster, an earthquake, hurricane, or other extraordinary but temporary conditions. So people under TPS have some security when they arrive. They can't be sent back again, and they can get employment authorization and authorization to travel. So this is a special category. And there are also special visa statuses available for victims of human trafficking, which is a whole other topic. So let's take a look at 3 specific areas that have been in the news a lot lately. Syria. So in all of the news that we've been hearing about other places, we may have kind of lost track of what's going on in Syria. But the Syrian refugee crisis is a humanitarian emergency resulting from the Syrian regional war that began in March of 2011. So we're going on 11 years of civil war. About half of the country's population has been displaced. So of those, about half of them are still within Syria but displaced from their homes. And 6.8 million are refugees who have fled the country. So where did all the Syrian refugees go? Anybody have a guess? 6.8 million people. Where did they go?
Europe?
Europe. Okay.
United States?
Some United States. Okay. All right. So most of them, of course, stayed in Syria, or half of them stayed in Syria. The majority are in Turkey. Turkey is really the hub of refugee movement out of the whole Middle Eastern area. There's a lot of work going on in Turkey, a lot of international aid agencies have moved into Turkey, but Turkey itself is not exactly the most stable place in the world either. The government there is sometimes called into question for human rights violations themselves. So, but Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, finally Germany is up there. So you'll see the United States, we are not exactly being overwhelmed with Syrian refugees in spite of what we might hear. So Afghanistan, this is a kind of a unique situation. of course, there are a lot of, the situation in Afghanistan has been ongoing for many years. A lot of refugees coming from Afghanistan. But most recently, we heard about the evacuation of the capital in August of 2021. More than 123,000 people were evacuated in August. So some of them were human rights defenders. Some of them were journalists, political activists, and then, of course, our U.S. forces and the Afghan citizens who had supported the U.S. forces. So, as of February of 2022, about 65,000 Afghanis have evacuated and settled in U.S. communities. So we have an official Afghan assistance program called Operation Allies Welcome. And it is the most significant U.S. resettlement since 1975, when 140,000 people were resettled following the withdrawal from Vietnam. So in our local community here, I know that there was a really great effort locally to welcome and support Vietnamese refugees from that time, way back then. Most of us are old enough to remember it, but it was a long time ago. So this is a very similar kind of situation where this was a sudden evacuation. It was really to protect people that were at extreme risk. So finally we come to Ukraine. This is the one that's in the news. This is a picture that a friend of mine, whose cousin is still there, sent her of their apartment building. Almost 13 million people have fled their homes in Ukraine. More than 6 million have left for neighboring countries, and about 6.5 million are thought to be displaced inside Ukraine, and 12 million people are thought to be stranded, still in their homes and unable to leave. So it's just really a huge number of people have been suddenly impacted by this. We've probably all seen the pictures of people at the borders, women and children. So where are all of Ukraine's refugees going? Again, most of them are going into neighboring countries in Europe. Germany has had 700,000 Ukrainians arriving, 40% of whom were children. The European Union has granted Ukrainians a blanket right to stay and work for up to 3 years under their legal refugee status. So what about refugees coming to the U.S.? So you may have seen a lot of them flew into Mexico and then were trying to get across the border there. That kind of created a lot of issues down there. But finally in April 21st, so very recently, the Biden administration announced they will open a streamlined refugee admission program, Uniting for Ukraine, to admit 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. And they will be eligible for resettlement assistance through federal, state, and private funding. So the United States has an agency called the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which administers federal resettlement funding. And initially, when it was first established, in 1980. It also authorized assistance in terms of housing help, cash assistance, medical care for up to 3 years, which is comparable to what the European help is. But in 1992, it was reduced to 8 months. So it went from 3 years of support and assistance down to 8 months. It's now, as of just a few days ago, been extended to 12 months. So now a refugee arriving in the U.S. will receive a full year of help getting established in their new community. So, so what? Like, what does this have to do with us? This was a lot of data, a lot of statistics, a lot of information about people in other parts of the world. But one of the things that I really like to try to emphasize is how words matter when we talk about people. So in order to qualify for all of this assistance and aid, people are being identified under the legal definitions. But how we refer to individuals as opposed to large groups of people has an impact on their ongoing experience. And as they're searching for that safe place and a safe community and a welcoming community, the words that we use are going to matter. If you are interested, I would recommend this book, Crossing: How We Label and React to People on the Move. And the author studied the impact that labels have on public perceptions and on subsequent policy decisions regarding whether it's local policies or federal policies or international policies, how we are interacting with people who are migrating. So I just want to ask you to listen to the following descriptions and assess your own thoughts and feelings. How does the language change your perception and expectations of the person being described? So how does the language used impact your sense of obligation or your desire to help the people involved? Okay? So if you talk about a wave or a flood of refugees, think about how that feels, as opposed to a large-scale movement. So for most people, a wave or a flood has a connotation of kind of a violent surge that just is uncontrollable, and you're just going to be wiped out by it. Right? So it can be kind of negative to think about a wave of refugees or a flood of refugees. But a large-scale movement of people is really a more accurate description of what's happening. Of course, this has been going around a long time. Illegal or undocumented have different connotations. The Migration Policy Institute prefers the use of unauthorized to describe people who are moving across international borders without legal recognition. In her book, Rebecca Hamlin's book, she talks about this really interesting study where in Europe, vulnerable migrant, people were asked about how they felt about vulnerable migrants as opposed to vulnerable refugees. And even though the word vulnerable was in both of those labels, people were more sympathetic towards refugees than migrants. So even though it's talking about the exact same group of people. Involuntary migrant, forced migrant, survival migrant. How do these different terms change how we might feel about a person? Individuals also self-identify differently. So some people have legal refugee status but prefer not to use that word for themselves because they feel like it carries a connotation of victimhood and helplessness. Other people who are not legally recognized as refugees want to be called refugees in order to validate the traumatic experience that they've been through. So, where am I? So what? So I would just encourage you to be informed, to use precise language, to, if you're able, contribute to reputable agencies that are helping refugees and people in crisis. And of course, as always, be kind and welcoming, because everyone deserves a safe place. So in the time we have left, I want to have time for questions at the very end, but I have the super privilege of inviting a friend of mine, Eugene Pristupa, who has very graciously offered to come join us for this conversation today. And Eugene and his wife are from Belarus. I don't know if it's okay if I show your picture up here. I stole it from your Facebook. So this is his lovely family, and I just wanted to invite Eugene here because I wanted to put a face to some of this legal stuff and some of this experience that we've been trying to describe here. So, welcome.
Well, thank you.
And yes, you're on. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your life while you were living in Belarus.
And thank you for having me. My name is Eugene Pristupa, born in the USSR. No longer exists. That's how I typically make fun of myself. I was born in a country that no longer exists. And I've spent 20 years of my life out there. And to be honest, despite the rough 90s and us as a country that was trying to identify ourselves from scratch when the union collapsed, and every one of the members of the union had to figure out how to be independent, how to build their own society, their own way of and means of life, economic, social life. We had some rough years of that self-discovery, but it was still a good life. It's a life that offered us still a safe and great environment to learn, to act as a society, and we still inherited a lot of the Soviet educational system and technology advancements that remained in our country physically. Graduated from school, got into college. College is one of the ways for guys, not so much for girls, to prolong their fate of going to the military or delay it until further. It's not exactly the most mesmerizing experience, so most of us are trying to extend it as far as we can. And upon getting into college, one of the opportunities we receive as students through the international programs that the U.S. Funds and extends is to come as an international student and visit the U.S. for the program called the Student Exchange, the U.S. Student Exchange Program. So I was part of that exchange in 2003, and the goal of these programs are to come work for about 3 months, to make a little bit of money, and then spend it on travel around the U.S., getting to know the country, the culture, and then coming back home and sharing those experiences with everybody else, which I've successfully done. Came back with nothing financially, but gained a lot culturally and experientially from my place here. And in 2004, upon my arrival, unbeknownst to me, I ended up staying. Not by my own plan, since I had been deep into my education back home, but I got an opportunity to travel with people I didn't know into the state I had no idea about, and just have an adventure of my life. And that's where my story in the U.S. began. And to be very precise and short about it, I came as a J1 exchange student. Again, it's a very specific, limited term visa to come and enjoy the U.S. and experience it for what it's worth. Then you have to go back home. And as I transitioned into this very fast-paced Nebraska experience, where I became part of the college out there within 3 days prior to the semester starting, I had to now, being a 20-year-old, figure out my pathway to legally stay and pursue the educational career that fell upon me. And that's where the tricky part begins for any immigrant, but for me more so because it's an 18-year-old story of pursuing a permanent stay in the U.S. And it's not an easy journey. And it gets really harder when you want to do it legally, in good faith, fulfilling all the requirements of the law that are imposed on me as the immigrant. So that's... My wife is also from Belarus. I just want to mention we actually met in Estes Park, Colorado, and as students, and then we split our ways. She went back home. I stayed here. We later met, again, years later, back home, started dating, got married, and rejoined here in the US in 2008, 2009. So that was about a 5-year journey for us.
And she is now a physician at St. John's.
Yeah, so now she actually serves in this community as a physician at St. John's, not far away.
So, what are some of the specific reasons that you don't want to go back to Belarus? What's going on in Belarus now that makes it maybe a place where you're not necessarily feeling safe?
So, back in the early 2000s, most of what we were experiencing was a political turmoil. And it's been going on for a while. We've had the same president for 25, 26 years. Things are getting a little old. The generation had been raised without knowing any different than Lukashenko. And so every time that we have elections, we have a certain amount of instability that used to be the reason for a lot of refugees to come back in the times, but it was a very slippery slope reasoning, which is why I have not pursued it. To define to an American officer a very finite and strict reason, beyond reasonable doubt, that you are subject to persecution based on the 5 reasons that Allison had mentioned, and that the reason is central to why you're being persecuted is not an easy chore for an immigrant. So I cannot immigrate just because I don't like my country or because I feel like I'm not welcome there. I have to have beyond reasonable doubt, proof that my race, nationality, religion, political affiliation, or social affiliation are my central reason for persecution, fear of harm, or death threats. For me, it was not the case. It was possible to wing it, and unfortunately, I know the cases, multiple cases, when that was true, when cases have been written up and things fly through the system. But going through the path of becoming student requires you to then change the status to a work visa, which is very stressful by itself to qualify and apply for it, and then years later qualify for a green card application. All in all, for us, it took 18 years. We just received a green card in March of this year. 6 figures. Boxes of documents. To your point, Allison, about the ease or not so of applying for an average folk. The current way the system is structured does not allow for an average person, even with master's degrees, doctorate degrees, to figure out how to fulfill all the requirements without the help of multiple attorneys and years of battles that we've got inflicted on ourselves just by tiny little omission that happened in the application. So, but going back quickly to the reasons, so there were really not many reasons back then. Right now we're going through the political crises, through the social crisis, the warfare that we're entangled in as the middle party that the military has been funneled through from Russia to Ukraine. And so we have a lot of younger generation that is fleeing right now because of the same reasons. They have no voice, they've been threatened, and they have no choice to even express themselves freely, to the point of not being able to possess books that have any reference to the old flag we used to carry in this country, in our country. So things are getting pretty scary out there, and most of the people fleeing go into Poland and then find their way into any country they can settle in, long-term or short-term. Not everyone wants to leave. Many people want to come back. They love their homes, their parents are there, their families are there, and it's not always a one-way street.
So lots of situations right now in Belarus that are really hard for us in the U.S. to comprehend. Banning a book because it has something.
Yeah, you literally get, just the most recent ones, and this includes my friends and family that I'm contacting with. People get put into jail for even as simple as wearing socks that have a white and red pattern to it, or an umbrella, because this is considered a statement against the current regime or support of the old red-white flag that is a symbol of opposition to the current establishment. Russia has exactly the same situation where anything that carries the delivery people who are carrying bags that have yellow and a blue combo that symbolizes the Ukrainian flag were put into prison for that long. Whether they even meant to do it or not, but that's the point to which we've descended, unfortunately.
So apart from your 18-year journey through the U.S. immigration system, what other kinds of challenges have you faced since moving to the U.S.?
So I think the major ones that will be applicable to all, and you've alluded to them a little bit, is the support that an immigrant receives when they arrive to this country. And it's a multi-tiered approach, so again, the government cannot solve and take care of all of these facets of support. They can maybe issue some support through the monetary policy and checks that are being written for a year or two or three. But there's a lot in the US that's so different from all the countries that refugees and asylum seekers, just plain immigrants, are coming from. A lot of differences that are so hard to understand and comprehend in the way the society works, the political system works, the financial system, jobs. We were taught that, no, if you're this, that's all you can do for the entirety of your life. First thing I learned when I came to the US, I can do anything. I got 3 jobs on the first day of my arrival to the US. I would never have thought that I would be a cashier and a photographer and a candy maker and everything in between. So, again, there's such a different thought process that happens in the mind of an American citizen or someone who had spent a good deal of time here that is hard for me as a newcomer to understand and wrap my head around. And for the community to come and help and assist to and embrace and come along these people and through social engagement and say, hey, can I help you, get you settled with this or this or that, and spend some time. I think that that's been the most valuable experience for us, is being part of a wide network of families who would invite us for a Sunday brunch or take us on a trip, golfing or playing, shooting guns in Nebraska is a big deal, a Husker game. It was a great experience, and it kind of now shows me how the family operates, how the social institutions work, and we exchange a lot that is hard to understand through just reading of papers when you arrive. And so I think that these are very critical pieces for us. Being a part of the local church was a great eye-opener into how the spiritual and the social network operates in our small community in Nebraska. And really being able to get into the active, gainfully employed workforce is also huge, because it takes you out of the position of a victim mentality that a lot of us carry with us as we flee from political instability and any other instability, and empowering to think differently about the possibilities that are presented and ahead in the communities that we belong to once we come here.
Great. All right. Anything else you want to add, or?
Just trying to think quickly through it. So I think a couple more points, and that'd be probably vital for me to share. On the political side of things, or the processing, just to give you an understanding that currently and throughout the last 20 years we've been here, there's so many inefficiencies, and that's unfortunate in the system because it's so big and it tries to accommodate so many cases and immigration pathways that it's almost impossible. We were on a delay and an extension of a delay upon an extension for many years, just trying to faithfully and legally be able to work and be a productive member of the society. And I think we're finally coming to a certain realization from the Immigration Service that they're so backed up, that holding on to the principles that they think are great no longer works in real life, and they're releasing some of those very strict requirements for spouses not being able to work. In my case, my wife is a doctor, she hasn't been able to work for 12 years. She stayed at home, not even mom, a wife at the time. And we have millions of these cases of talented, willing, fellow citizens, immigrants who would like to be a part of the society, part of the workforce, and they can't because of the legal trickery that we have imposed on ourselves while creating the legal laws of immigration. Something else that I think was helpful to us, and it happens in some communities more than others, and it's very special to the US versus Europe, is when we come as immigrants, I've never felt one day of my life that I've been an immigrant. So the treatment from the community has always been very welcoming, and I never felt like, I'm a second-class citizen. And in Europe, wherever you go, the first generation of immigrants is very frequently the generation that never feels that much at home as we feel here. And that is huge for a person who comes and maybe doesn't feel quite confident to assimilate in the society, to feel like they're part of the family. And so that again goes to all of us, including me now, to host, to welcome, and to come alongside even one individual, like what we're doing right now, and just help them understand what this life is about, what this community is about, how everything works, answer their questions, be their friends, share them about your path, about things you learned, and for us it was almost again a part of the community, part of the church, local church body, that gave us a lot of insight into not only how this network operates, the network of people locally, but also to give us the foundation for our faith and take us away from the stress of the daily life that we've been enduring.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate you having me.
So, I know we're
So we are about out of time here.
okay.
But I really do want to thank Allison and Eugene for coming and sharing your information, your experience with us. And thank you all for joining us. And please come back again next week.
Great. And we're out of time officially, but if you have any questions for us, Sean.
Yeah, this looks just like the working homeless situation we got in the United States, exactly as it was said. Displacement, everyone being shuffled around all over the United States, as well as the territories too. Could we
Louder.
Could we apply these? Can we apply the same regulations to help regulate how to help a working homeless, like a federal program with a UNHCR card and process, instead of keeping it local? And then the church organizations, they do help tremendously. I remember some of the friends I grew up with, they were Vietnamese, and they did a tremendous job in helping. But church groups here in the United States, regarding United States citizens who become working homeless or homeless, just tend to forget about them. So is there any way to kind of help them out too? Because it's getting to a point where it is a problem. Immigration problems just within the United States between people that are from New York City that I talked to. There was one woman I met, she's from Syracuse, has a bachelor's degree. She's homeless. She's been living on, because I smoke. So I stopped at a rest stop. And lo and behold, she's been there for the last 8 months.
So we have our own
Yes.
internally displaced population.
Yes, but anything that, like this, and and it actually works, it does, it's a process. I didn't know about this process. And we should be able to contribute to the staff should be able to help too, But see, that's the other thing too, but why can't we utilize these programs that we got to help? Because it's happening.